You're listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast. Black History Month is an opportunity for us all to take some time in the month of February to reflect through the lens of the Black experience in both the progress we as a nation have made and the continued work needed to be done in seeking equality and diversity, inclusion, equity, and access. The Iowa Judicial Branch is taking this opportunity to continue to press forward in our mission of administering justice equally to all Iowans. In allowing for curiosity and striving to dig deeper, we aim to ask harder questions, remain open to learning, and apply this learning to the everyday work that we do in our efforts to administer fair and equal justice. Today's podcast demonstrates two women in leadership within the Iowa Judicial Branch committed to actioning this through humble and curious conversation. This episode is a conversation led by Iowa Supreme Court Chief Justice Susan Christensen and Director of Education and Training at the Iowa Judicial Branch, Kim Carson, and is moderated by Judicial Education Specialist Mark Bush. Justice Susan Larson Christensen was born and raised in Harlan, a small town in southwest Iowa. After high school, she took a less conventional route to the Supreme Court, first attending secretarial school, later earning her bachelor's degree from Judson College and her law degree from Creighton Law School. After 16 years practicing law, she was appointed as a district associate judge in 2007 and a district court judge in 2015. In 2018, she was appointed to the Iowa Supreme Court, where she has served as chief for the past year. She has 5 children with her high school sweetheart Jay and 6 grandchildren. Kim Carson is the Judicial Branch's Director of Education and Training. A lifelong Iowan who split her time growing up between Des Moines and Red Oak, she graduated high school from Des Moines Public Schools and received her degree from Louisiana State University. Kim would describe her path as proudly unconventional. Before she began her dedicated work in the justice system, she was a professional and highly decorated track and field athlete on the Iowa and national stage. Prior to her current position, she worked as a judicial education specialist within the state court administration, a juvenile court officer in the 5th Judicial District, and for 10 years prior, worked in several other capacities within the delinquency and child welfare systems. She is a mom of a 16-year-old cancer-surviving daughter and a 9-year-old son she adopted in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mark Bush, the third of our 3 lifelong Iowans today, was born and raised in Waverly. After earning his degree from the University of Northern Iowa, he spent 7 years as a science teacher in rural, suburban, and international schools. He later transitioned out of the classroom to oversee inclusive education development and continuing education training for educators, business professionals, and organizational leaders throughout the state. Beginning in March 2020, Mark has worked as a judicial education specialist in the Iowa Judicial Branch, supporting the efforts to deliver and implement quality training for all judicial branch employees.
Hello, and welcome to Access to Justice, a personal reflection on Black History Month, the judiciary, and the impact on Black Iowans. My name is Mark Bush, and I'm a judicial education specialist at the Iowa Judicial Branch. I'm honored to join you in listening to 2 women in leadership within the Judicial Branch talk about Black History Month, and also to reflect on how the Iowa Judicial Branch is working to administer justice under the law equally to all persons. First, I'd like to welcome Kim Carson, Director of Education and Training at the Iowa Judicial Branch. Kim, it is great to see you today.
It's great to see you today as well, Mark.
Awesome. Also joining me today via phone call from Harlan, Iowa, is Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court, Susan Christensen. Chief, thank you for calling in during your busy schedule. How are things over in Western Iowa today?
Well, I'm doing great over here in Western Iowa. Thank you, everyone, for including me in part of this podcast. I think it's exciting.
Yes, it's great to be here today. So before we start talking about Black History Month, I wanted to just talk about how you two met. So for the two of you, the way you two started developing a more profound connection was actually outside of the formal work setting. Kim, can you share a little bit about how you met and how the friendship between you two formed?
I sure can, Mark. I think that's actually a profoundly exciting story. It actually started, we had several different interactions at different times throughout the branch, some that I remember and some that we talk about later on that Justice Christensen kind of has a different take on. The one that I remember most importantly was an opportunity where I happened to be with my son in Barnes & Nobles. He was driving me crazy because he was looking for a book, and I actually saw Justice Christensen across the store. And in that moment, I was teaching implicit bias within the branch, and so I was actually traveling around the branch, interacting with different employees. And so I was always in this frame of mind of, do I want to engage that person or do I not? Because the conversation seemed to always go in a whole different direction. And so I can't remember whether she caught my eye or I caught hers, but we kind of connected in the store and we started having a conversation, and it actually went in a completely different direction than what I expected. It was really just two women connecting in a store about our kids and our experiences and having a very deep conversation in a place that was just not expected in Barnes & Nobles in West Des Moines. One of the things that was most profound for me was the openness and the canny that she spoke to me about. Her experience within the implicit bias, and also just having conversation with me about how we work in the branch and the things that we do in our roles. And so one of the things I want to talk about that I think is very important and a lot of people think about is just how do you engage someone you're building a relationship with, especially in this time of race and those kind of things, to ask difficult questions. And so I'm actually going to kick this back over to Justice Christensen to talk about an interaction we had where she asked me a very important question, and it led to us building a great relationship.
Thank you, Kim. I so remember that day at Barnes & Noble as well. And I remember exactly which store it was. And I remember we were in the children's section. I have grandkids, and you have, as you said, I think your younger son was with you. And I think we also were sitting on these chairs that were kind of shaped like mushrooms. So that's a hard conversation to not remember. But I like what you just said about the evolution of our relationship. And it reminds me of something that Thurgood Marshall once said, that we can only attain freedom if we learn to appreciate what's different and then muster up the courage to discover what is fundamentally the same. And Kim has given me that space, that kind of environment to start engaging in that kind of an opportunity. So at the end of the day, maybe Kim and I have very different backgrounds, but we also have a lot that's similar and very common. We both turn our heads to someone yelling, "Mom!" And we both consider rural Iowa to be home. We also have something in our resumes that's very similar, which is a heavy emphasis on working with Iowa's youths. And we're both team members of Iowa's Judicial Branch. And so all of those things bring us together. But before either of us landed this job in our current positions, I think we were beginning to lay the groundwork of having our paths continue. I can't even say cross. Our paths have crisscrossed. We keep bumping into each other, and in a good way, and in a positive way. And Kim, I remember something that you asked me during our Barnes & Noble chat, something that was profound to me, and I don't think you realized it, how much it made me feel comfortable that I could have a candid conversation with you. But you said something like, "Hey, Justice, through my position in the judicial branch, can you think of maybe a way that I could perhaps incorporate and give honor to my heritage?" And you completely broke the ice with me, Kim, when you said that. I knew exactly what you meant, and I loved that candidness. So it's clear to me that our recent partnership is more than just growing the judicial branch by our internal workings, but we're both committed to growing the judicial branch with our human capital in an effort to move justice forward in the state of Iowa.
I would agree. And bigger than that for me was the opportunity when we were having that conversation. And it allowed me that moment to understand a very important concept that often as a Black woman, I don't get to have in the workplace. And that's coming to my workplace and being able to be the authentic version of myself. And the thing that I remember, it's interesting how we remember different things, is you asked me a pretty I would say, a difficult question in that moment. We were talking, and it's one that I think a lot of people want to ask of different races of each other, but they really feel uncomfortable, right? And so in that moment, we really didn't know each other that well, but it was something about two mothers coming together and sharing experiences about our kids. I have a child with a disability. We were just sharing a lot of things. And you asked me that day a simple question, and that was, in the past, I've struggled what to call somebody. African American, Black, Afro-American, so many things had come across. And I remember talking to you about saying that much like people when they decide if they want to be, she, him, her, they, it was just the importance of asking the question, because I couldn't give you a finite answer. I prefer to be called Black. There's other people that prefer, for their various perspectives, to be called African American. But the key is to be open and curious enough in a place of humanity to say, what would you like to be called? What is your preference? And I think in that moment, what that made me realize is that we had moved past, in just that subtle way in Barnes and Nobles, from being people that just cross paths as colleagues to starting to develop a more profound and deep relationship as women, as professionals, and now today as leaders within the judicial branch, driving efforts like diversity, inclusion, and access, procedural fairness, new employee orientation, just all the different things we do in the branch to develop the human side of it, or the human capital, that really impact how justice is disseminated throughout the branch, because it doesn't just stop in the courtroom. It's every employee and how they engage every citizen that comes that really gets at that procedural justice part. And that started with a simple conversation, a simple engagement of you and I, and it's developed over the past, I would say, 4 or 5 years to a much more profound relationship that we can come to each other in some of the silliest ways sometimes, or serious, and really have an honest conversation that not only moves us forward, but also justice and the branch.
Chief, you sent out an all-staff email to judicial branch employees, and in that email, you stated the following. Every February, this country celebrates Black History Month, a time when we reflect on the achievements and contributions of Black Americans and our progress to create a more perfect union. While this celebration lasts a month, we strive to make this national observance an integral part of our day-to-day lives. So, Chief, why is it important to take time to address this?
Thank you, Mark. Black History Month is important for us to address in the judicial branch because of our awareness that there are disparate outcomes for Black Iowans in our own court system. And those outcomes, they have to be a symptom of something else. And I believe it's incumbent upon our branch to look at this issue from that objective lens. And we can't just address the symptoms, which are the disparate outcomes. We have to also examine our judicial decisions, and as well as any progress that we may have made in the past. We need to be vigilant in our efforts to acknowledge how we may be falling short and how we can administer justice equally to all persons.
I couldn't agree more. A lot in what I do at the branch is really taking abstract concepts and helping people apply those to the way they every day do their job. So oftentimes what I think about is how I can apply what I'm trying to teach them to something that they could take ownership from and apply their experience is really the foundation for adult learning in general. And so when I think about this, very much like you do, and how do we take these concepts and apply it to justice and make it applicable to people's jobs, I think about explaining this as a house. Especially where I lived in Des Moines area, I bought an old home. And it was over in the Roosevelt area. And so when I walked in, immediately I was like, oh, this is beautiful. And then you're there for a year and you're like, whoa, there's some things going on in this house. And so you have to continue to update this house to continue to make it your home. It wasn't necessarily my responsibility what went wrong with the house, but now that I'm there, I have to maintain this house and turn it into a great home for my family. And I see this judicial branch as my family. And so when I think about the impact of the experience of Black Americans as they interact as branch employees or even customers who come into the branch. I think it's important for us as we administer justice to think about that and their role, and why taking this time to reflect and think about African American history under that bigger umbrella of civil rights issues that impact women, LGBTQ, any ethnic or social justice realm type thing, it's very important for us to understand that there was work in the past, there's work we have to do now, and there's things that we need to anticipate in the future.
Chief, why is it essential to make this an integral part of our day-to-day lives?
Well, I think it's really important for us to remember that justice is not just administered in the courtroom, and it's more than just one ruling by one particular judge. Every member of our judicial branch, and we have 1,700 employees, each and every one of them have an important role in administering justice, and we are all on the hook, all 1,700 of us. That means every clerk, every assistant clerk, every administrative staff, court reporters, juvenile court officers, every judge, all the way up to the Supreme Court. We are all responsible and it's play an important role in administering justice to everyone. So when an Iowan walks into any one of our courtrooms, and we have an awful lot of them in 99 counties, but they need to experience procedural fairness in every aspect of our effort to provide justice. And procedural fairness does not require a law degree. It needs to be a part of every single aspect of our judiciary.
I totally agree with you again, Chief. We have so much in common in our thoughts and how we think about this process. And from a perspective of the education department and how we impact the employees, I think the development of them as human capital and the value we have in people is so important at the branch. Historically at the branch, we really focused on the substantive education and technical skills of our staff. And I think as we move forward, with addressing all these issues and getting at that procedural fairness and justice, understanding that it's just not about the judge. It's about every employee, all 1,700 plus, really providing access to justice in the way that we process cases, in the way that we engage people, and how, simple interpersonal communication that you don't think of that profound, but could really break down that process for our customers. And so when I think about that, that helps to build trust, respect, collaboration, and really helps us to focus our efforts when we do develop people internally to really address our biases and how we see the world so that we create a court system that is fair and impartial from top to bottom.
I agree with you, Kim. Once again, we're going back and forth. And I just realized that you're the one, I think, that got me to start using that term, human capital. I think I was the first one to say it today, but I've heard you say it several times. Can you, in your own words, maybe there are some people listening today to us that wonder, why do they keep saying that? How would you explain that? I know I started saying it because of my conversations with you. Yes.
It's just this concept that I've been playing with, and we've been playing with at the branch, and then also my work that I've done nationally with other judicial educators about really focusing on how you impact justice from a personal piece and also a structural piece. And part of that starts with developing what we call the people, or the people capital or human capital within your organization. Historically, when we think about educating adults, we think about the tasks or the things they need to do to complete their jobs. I need to learn how to use the computer system. I need to make sure I can read the code. That's great. It's important, and it's things we need to do with our business. But when we start to go into areas like fairness, how not to be biased, how to be just, we really have to step outside to develop the actual person or the people capital in those soft skills, interpersonal communication, implicit bias, and all the different things we look at that really impact the process or how people feel about justice or if they were treated justly. And I think that's an area where we're moving forward that's new, but it gets us to a place where we can really access that mission that we strive for every day. in a more profound and active way, and not one where we're just sitting back and letting it happen, but we're active in making it happen.
Having this conversation with you today may have been premised on Black History Month, but it's also giving me a lot of time to think about racial justice issues that have made their way through Iowa's court system. And it makes me aware we need to take an honest look at the biases that exist in ourselves and within our organization. And that's what you're getting at. Because as I stated earlier, procedural fairness, it hinges on the recognition of implicit bias as well as our interactions with others.
Kim, how are the two of you equipped to take on this work?
Honestly, we're equipped in many ways. And one of the most profound I want to talk about in this moment is just by being who we are and coming to work authentically every day as women in leadership. In the work that I do, looking at what we talk about a lot in the branch about our biases and implicit bias, one of the leaders in that field is the Kieran Institute at Ohio State University. And one of the things they talk about that can help you mitigate your bias is really understanding the role of counter-stereotypical images that start to undo those historical understandings of how we rehearse and understand the world around us. Chief, by being a woman Chief Justice, is counter-stereotypical image that most people would engage with. Me, as being a Black woman in leadership at the branch and being one of the first, is a counter-stereotypical image of people listening in the audience or people that come into a meeting and see us. And that's a very profound way to impact how people see people and change the way that we see people indirectly. What's important about that is historically, that is what the court has offered through these rulings, is access to people, more profoundly to Black people. So as you look at those court rulings that the Supreme Court has done historically in the state of Iowa that have impacted Black lives, they've really provided access in a way that was not provided before. So when I think about myself and I think about Chief Justice and I think about the role that I serve within the branch and the role that she serves, it's the image of access, not just diversity, not just inclusion, not just equity, but access to people, systems, and information that then provides or open a door for the next young Black lady to dream that she could be in my job, or the next woman to dream that she could be Chief Justice.
I like that, Kim. I know we're both aware that the judicial branch is making a concerted effort to not just recognize implicit biases, but also to mitigate the negative implicit biases. And as I know you are very well aware, because you are a big part of ruling this out, is that we are going to have a 2-year curriculum regarding unconscious bias. And we, of course, will continue to include in our new employee orientation an emphasis on implicit bias and procedural fairness.
Yes, we are. I understand completely what you're talking about, Chief Justice. With this 2-year pilot program and then also the efforts at new employee orientation, we're not just looking at this from a subjective view. We're really looking at this from an objective view, based in data collection and looking at our organization from a point of where the data drives us to provide educational interventions and systemic understanding of where we need to change or where we need to adapt. But on the other piece, maybe areas we don't. And so I really think our efforts in addressing implicit bias through this 2-year pilot program is going to be important, because not only does it take a look at issues of race, it looks at issues of gender, intergroup bias. It also takes a look at moving forward into LGBTQ, disability, and all other protected classes. So I think not only have we led the nation in looking at racial bias, we're also taking that next step to make sure we're planning ahead to address fairness for anyone that may come in to the courts as a protected class, to make sure we're equipping our work staff to mitigate or be as less biased as possible, to really provide that fair but procedural fair access to justice.
Chief, why does the judicial branch need to lead the way in these efforts?
We're an independent branch of government. And because of that independence, I think we are uniquely situated to to ensure that the pursuit of justice for every single Iowan is a positive experience and unfettered by outside influence or implicit biases. And so I believe with our focused training in the area of implicit bias, it's my hope and it's my belief that we are going to advance better administration of justice for all Iowans. And like both Kim and I have been saying, the judiciary cannot stand in the way of making sure that every Iowan has an experience that is surrounded by fairness every step of the way. And at the end of the day, if someone feels like their experience or their situation was not adequately addressed, we do have a built-in review system through the different various court levels.
She's totally right. One of the things by being an employee of this branch and being at different levels, from being a JCO to now, an education specialist to now the director, is I've learned from different vantage points. And I think that's why educating and developing what I call the human capital is important, because each branch employee, depending on their office, their county, their department, what their specialty is, their expertise is going to look at justice differently and how they administer that. And what's important as you develop people, you wanted to develop them in this ideal that first started, in my understanding, with the former Chief Justice Katie, but also I've talked about this in depth with Chief Justice Christensen, and it's the branch being the moral compass, right? The compass for how these things work, and being an independent branch of government that doesn't rely on or is not influenced by the others. We're not an advocacy group, and we're not political. We are literally the guiders for whether it be the other branches of government or for society to always seek justice and fairness. And I think that is really important as we think about, and the ability that I have in my position to educate our staff or our internal human capital. I think when we think about things like implicit bias, procedural fairness, and all the things that we need to impact each employee's impact on how they action justice, is just profound and exactly where it needs to start. Chief Justice, I just want to say that I have really enjoyed this conversation that we've shared and the opportunity that you've given me after my request to spend some time during a very important time for me as an African American woman to talk about the impact of African American history on me and my role as a judicial branch employee. But more importantly, what this conversation has driven home even more is just our ongoing relationship and the commitment we both have to continuing this humble and curious conversation that we are building every time we have an opportunity to meet up, whether it be by happenstance or, when we schedule our coffees or our lunches. And so I just want to say thank you for this opportunity.
And thank you as well, Kim. I think it's been great. I mean, we've had many conversations that weren't put out for a podcast. And it's kind of cool to be able to say everything we've discussed previously is going to work towards our goal, our joint goal of moving our judiciary forward. And I also like the idea that this has been called kind of a curious conversation. I'm hopeful that by people listening to us, that they realize if we can be this candid with each other, and if we can be this approachable with each other, I hope that they feel comfortable approaching you or approaching me, and maybe making some of those conversations come to life and expanding our own experiences. So thank you for making me feel comfortable to have a candid conversation with you, and also that we both are comfortable saying it out loud to all of our listeners. This is something that we think is going to move our judiciary forward, and it's also, I believe, going to move professional women forward, regardless of our race and regardless of our areas of interest and passion and experience. So thank you.
Well, Chief Justice Christensen, Kim Carson, thank you so much for letting the listeners and me join in on this curious conversation during Black History Month to talk about the ways the judicial branch administers justice equally to all persons.
You've been listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast hosted and produced by me, Marissa Gall. If you would like more information about Iowa's courts, you can visit www.iowacourts.gov. You can also follow the Iowa Judicial Branch on Twitter and YouTube at Iowa Courts. This episode of In the Balance is now adjourned. Until next time.